The message I want to give today is a very uncomfortable one. You ever have something that's uncomfortable, sort of like a pebble in your shoe, or I guess a lady if you had a run in your nylon or whatever it was. Things are just not, that things just aren't working out well for her and you don't see it. And the whole subject is difficult to bring up, difficult to discuss because it's awkward. But I want to give you a little background before I jump into this awkward presentation. And some of you know I grew up on a farm, in a Minnesota farm. Now, this isn't the one I grew up on, but there was a very large barn. It was a dairy farm. Had a lot of 38 dairy cows and a lot of calves and young stock. And then we developed a beef herd as well. And of course, we had to raise all the feed for them. And so we had fields of corn and hay. And that was a lot of work, and fortunately my dad had 4 boys who were all teenagers at one time, so we could get a lot of work done. And I have no sisters. So my dad figured out the secret to getting things done was to putting each boy on a different project. And it worked out very well. We got a lot of things done. And on a dairy farm, there was never a lack of things to do. In fact, we had a brown Swiss dairy herd. Cows looked like this. They were varying shades of brown, and it was a dairy herd. It was the highest producing herd in the state for 7 consecutive years. And this led me then, and then off I went to college, and led me to a background in the livestock and nutrition and disease and health industry. And so following college, I went to work for a company called Land O'Lakes in Iowa. Big company, Fortune 500 sized, and as an animal nutrition and health representative for them. And I traveled over a chunk of eastern Iowa. And so I went through and I had the experiment farm information and so forth. And then after working for Land O'Lakes, I was recruited to come to work for North Dakota State University to manage an experiment farm for them, a dairy experiment farm. And once again, it was all what I grew up with, what I had done with Land O'Lakes, now doing it to help people get master's degrees and doctorates, conducting the research on health, nutrition, and disease resistance and so forth. And you say, well, what does that have to do with a sermon subject? Well, I want to give you a title for today because the subject itself is with regard to the health. It's not just of livestock, but we can apply it to our spiritual lives as well. Because you can have the best fed livestock or the best fed, any creature and keep them disease-free from communicable diseases and so forth. But there is a problem that happens that you can't see, and that is the problem of parasites. And that is, so today I want to title this message, Getting Rid of Spiritual Parasites. Because parasites are the little tiny, what we would say in layman's terms, little wiggly worms that live on the inside of bodies. And they lay eggs on the inside of those bodies, and those parasites get spread. Yes. We'll do it this way. And so, and I don't have cattle now, as I did when I was growing up, but I have sheep. Now, I don't have very many sheep. I got a few sheep, a half a dozen ewes and a ram, and whatever young ones that they raise. And I want to relate today the parasites in sheep to our spiritual lives. And you say, well, why sheep? Well, the house of Israel is referred to, I looked up maybe 200 times in the Bible as sheep. 155 times in the Old Testament, 45 in the New Testament are the references to sheep. And in Matthew 15:24, Jesus said, I was not sent except to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Meaning he had a special message to take. So he was calling people as sheep that were lost. Now, if you've ever seen a sheep that was lost, they're very sad, they're very lonely, and they'll want to cling together and look for other sheep. If we look at Matthew 10 and verse 6, Jesus said to his disciples, then becoming apostles, when you say go, sent out ones, go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, meaning the people that he has called. And of course, to be a member of the house of Israel, it isn't genetic. It is those who follow the commands and the beliefs of Jesus Christ. So the apostles were to go and preach, saying the kingdom of heaven is at hand. So those people that were responding to the call of God are the sheep that he's referring to. Now, it's not a big flock of sheep, because the church is referred to as a little flock. Well, how much is a little flock? My German grandmother was a wonderful cook. You could tell that by looking at grandfather. And and I asked, well, how much of what do you put in what? And she says, well, you put a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of this. In other words, not much, but just enough to make it right. And so a little bit is pretty subjective, but little is comparatively, instead of all or universal or everyone, just a little bit. And it's his good pleasure, God's good pleasure, to give us the kingdom, to bring us to the knowledge that of the hope of the future in the kingdom of God. Now, he's called us sheep. We're in a little flock. Well, sheep need a shepherd. And in John 10:11, we read when Jesus said, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd gives his life for the sheep. Now, and of course, we have that knowledge of the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, and then the principles by which the sheep, or the people that respond to the call of God, are cared for. Now, I looked in the references to sheep, and of course, I had again about 200 references. These are my sheep, the kind that I raise. They don't have wool; they really have hair, brown hair. They're originally from North Africa, brought over by Columbus and his buddies to the Barbados Islands. They call them black-bellied Barbados sheep, black legs and underbellies. The ram isn't there in this picture, but the rams have horns. They look like Rocky Mountain sheep. And he always looks at me suspiciously when I walk in to feed him. Don't turn your back on him. But I think of these because I have to, when I'm caring for sheep, I have to watch out for their bodies, what is best for them, how to best produce. And the same thing is true with us and our bodies, because our bodies are the temple of the Holy Spirit. So we have to look out for our bodies. So we're talking about a subject, like I say, it's very uncomfortable to talk about in a casual conversation. How many people at the dinner table discuss parasites? Do you do that on social occasions? No. In 1 Corinthians 3:16, do you not know that you are the temple of God and the Spirit of God dwells in you? So there is a physical spiritual analogy that we're looking at today about about parasites. Now, parasites are things that live off of the host. There is a parasite. A mosquito, for example, is a parasite, an external parasite. It comes and lives off a host. Hopefully you don't host too many mosquitoes this year. And there are other biting insects and other things that will try to live off of you. And so I want to take a quick look at the parasite life cycle in sheep, because this is similar to how sin affects us. And the sheep have these mature parasites, you might say little worms living inside their gut, and that are adults that lay eggs. And the eggs pass out of the sheep into the dung, and the dung are in the pasture, and they develop larvae. The eggs hatch and they start to grow in the dung in the pasture, and there can be intermediate stages depending on the kind of parasite that it is. And so the grass then, and sometimes it's a 3 or 4 stage parasite where the rabbits will eat the grass, and then the parasite passes through them, and they pass it through their digestive tract, and then it's on the grass, and then the sheep eat that. Sometimes it's a process that involves snails. Depends on the type of parasite. But there's a cycle that goes through it. Now, how do you stop the parasites from damaging your sheep? And that's going to be similar to what we hear. Now, and it works with any kind of livestock, or humans for that matter, and that is you can poison them. You can kill them in the gut. And what they do is they give a parasite medicine so that it kills the parasite internally, not enough to kill the animal, but enough to kill the parasite. And that's one way. But what happens then, you kill them all, there's still plenty of eggs and larvae out in the grassy pasture, so they're going to continue to get reinfected. So that's a problem. So how to solve that problem is a good shepherd will move the sheep to the next pasture that isn't grazed down, that doesn't have any parasite eggs in it, because it takes 4 or 5 days, every 4 or 5 days if you move the sheep, and so forth. Then you can keep moving them around and they will not reinfect. So you've got to keep busy. You've got to kill the parasite, and then you've got to keep the sheep from getting reinfected. Well, there are spiritual parasites that are affecting our body. What if we do everything right? I mean, you are just a marvel of creation, and you do everything right. You go through like the Daniel, and you do pray at least 3 times a day. You fast every week like the Pharisees. You are on it. I mean, right down the line. You do your daily Bible study. I mean, you can quote scriptures like nobody's business. I mean, you've got it all down. But then, what if you got a parasite, a spiritual parasite? And so I'm going to go through some of the spiritual parasites that we all face, even if we have optimum health and optimum disease resistance otherwise, and optimum nutrition. And one spiritual parasite that we have to fight against, and that is presuming there's a moral equivalency among all churches and religions. Now, last fall, some of you may have heard that the Roman Catholic Pope said that everybody has the same God and we just have a different path to get there. Well, if you presume a moral equivalency between the truths of God and Protestant, Catholic, or indeed Orthodox, or whatever, people that call themselves Christians, that's a parasite. You have to be careful. In Matthew 7, chapter 7, verse 13 and 14, we're told by Christ to enter by the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the way that leads to destruction. There are many who go by it, because the narrow is the gate and difficult is the way which leads to life, and there are few who find it. Remember what kind of flock we are? We're a little flock, and it says few who find it. So we really have to pay attention to enter by the narrow gate. And of course, that was the message last week about explaining what is the gate. It's a place where you make decisions. Each one of us has a place in our lives. We have to make the right decisions. If we look in 2 Corinthians 6, verses 14 through 16, if we presume moral equivalency, then we tend to mix it up with others. Well, we're all pretty much the same. And I had one lady tell me when I was on a hospital visit, doesn't go to church, to our church, but she says, well, we all really believe the same thing after all. And I'm thinking, we actually read the Bible and go through and do what it says. So 2 Corinthians 6, starting in verse 14, do not be unequally yoked together with unbelievers. For what fellowship has righteousness with lawlessness? What communion has light with darkness? And what accord has Christ with Belial, the devil? Or what part has a believer with an unbeliever? And what agreement has the temple of God with idols, false worship? For you are the temple of the living God. And as God has said, I will dwell in them, I will walk among them, I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Well, if the people claim to be Christians, as we heard in the sermonette, but they don't keep the laws of God, then we're really running the risk of fellowshipping with them if we have interest or activity for those who don't honor God's laws. Now, this goes beyond just, say, showing up or them or interacting with them. But fundamentally, we don't want to jump into that swimming pool, okay, as it were, because we'll get flavored by the water. Now, so the first one is we cannot presume that all churches or beliefs have some level of moral equivalency. The second spiritual parasite we have to fight against is don't get involved with false teachings. Now, we don't always know if it's a false teaching, so it does require some research. If we look in Galatians 1 and verse 9, and Galatians 1:9, as we've said before, so now I say again, if anyone preaches any other gospel to you than what you have received, let him be accursed. That's a very uncomfortable thought. Now, I've had some bad days along the way in life. I don't want to be accursed to make them worse, okay? I want them to work out well. In 2 John 1:10, and this gives an explicit instruction, 2 John 1:10, if anyone comes to you and does not bring this doctrine, meaning the truth, do not receive him into your house nor greet him. In other words, you don't mix it up with somebody who is there to convert you to some other belief system. I know we've had people, and you may have had too, who come to your door and they want to leave a tract. And they want to say, here, we've got something that will help your life, and it's from some other religion or some other church. And it doesn't make it into the house, because I happen to have read this verse. And the same thing is true if it comes on television, or if it comes on an internet video or wherever. You don't want to bring that stuff into your house or into your life. You don't welcome it. And I'll tell you, one of the most distasteful things that I have ever done was when I did the study in order to prepare the presentation, the Bible study presentation this last year. I think it was about a year or so ago, about false belief systems, and you have to dig in through it. And after I got through doing that, I had to go take a shower, wash my hands with soap, and say, oh man, how do you scrub your brain from studying this in order to help inoculate and prevent people from getting into like the false gospel of Enoch and so forth. Very uncomfortable. So don't get involved with false teachings, meaning don't even bring them into your house. The third spiritual parasite we have to fight against is normalizing sin in our lives. Now, this happens without even realizing it. Normalizing sin in our lives, we watch movies or television or internet videos, and it shows sin creeps in just as if it were a normal part of life. Now, I taught school for many years, and one of the other teachers had two little girls. She taught the next room down the hall, and she did not put her kids in that school, in the same school, because she saw the direction it was going was LGBTQ mindset. And so she left, I left. When I asked her, why are you leaving? She said, I don't want to normalize this behavior for my children. She didn't want to make everybody think it was okay that sinful behavior would be okay. Now, it isn't just what we watch, it's the people that were around. Of course, magazines or books that make sin seem normal. And music is really one way that really beats the drum into our minds. And people repeat popular music that has that sin creeps in those themes. So we have to guard ourselves from that creeping sin, because if it happens a little bit at a time, gradually it seems normal. In 1 Timothy 6:20, what does Paul write to his helper Timothy? O Timothy, guard what was committed to your trust. Avoid the profane and idle babblings and contradictions of what is falsely called knowledge. So somebody says, hey, look what I've discovered, or look what I found. But it's contrary to the truth. And you're going, whoa, that sounds a little strange. You got to guard yourself against that creeping sin. Profane and idle babblings, contradictions. And Paul warned Timothy, and he was a minister following in Paul's footsteps. And he says, this is going to happen. So you want to prevent that from happening to the best you can. The fourth spiritual parasite to fight against is consuming things to excess that are not healthy to our body. Now, the body is, of course, the a temple of the Holy Spirit. We read that one earlier. And if we do anything like this to consume to excess, I know my brother told me this one time. He says, I eat to live, I don't live to eat. And then a mutual friend of ours says, we have to get pleasure from things other than food. And I thought, well, that's pretty neat, but I get a lot of pleasure from certain kinds of food. In fact, I can make a list of all the yummy things that I really, really like. But he says, it's not bad to do that. You just have to get pleasure from other things as well. So the general rule of thumb that I've heard is, does it have more than 5 ingredients in it? If it's got more than 5 ingredients, maybe you should be a little suspicious of it, because you're getting things that you don't even know that are creeping into your system, meaning nutritionally. Now, we can be led astray by many things, and it isn't just food, it's also things that we drink. And it doesn't mean that food is wrong. It doesn't mean that wine is wrong. But in Proverbs 20, verse 1, wine is a mocker, strong drink is a brawler, and whoever's led astray by it is not wise. So don't be led astray by that. Don't let it take over your lives, no matter what it is, whether it's food, whether it's drink, or whatever, because that can cause you be a spiritual parasite. That can be a cycle that will hurt your spiritual life. Now, so it's not just what we watch or read or listen to, but also what we eat or drink. The fifth category of spiritual parasites that we have to fight against is bad friends, choosing bad friends. Now, we normally don't go out and say, I'll find some bad people and I want to be their friend. It doesn't really happen that way. It just sort of creeps into your life, people that you associate with, but you have to be mindful if they're leading you in a wrong direction. Now, an example, we're directed in 1 Corinthians 15:33, and Paul writes to the church in Corinth, do not be deceived, evil company corrupts good habits. Hey, come on, Charlie Brown, let's go out and have a good time tonight. We'll head down to XYZ place. I hear there's a lot of fun going on there. What's their definition of fun? Okay, and have they been there before? In 1 Corinthians 5:11, 1 Corinthians 5:11, but now I've written to you not to keep company with anyone named a brother who is sexually immoral or covetous or an idolater or reviler or drunkard or an extortioner, not even to eat with such persons. You don't mix it up socially with those people who go outside the laws of God. So don't be deceived, because if you do, what happens? They will corrupt your good habits and lead you away. So we don't want to do it. So choosing bad friends. Now there's a number of biblical examples on this one. And I want to jump into one interesting one. But a little background first. Israel was a divided kingdom following King David. And we have the northern kingdom, Israel to the north, 10 tribes, and Judah, which is Judah and Benjamin, the kingdom of Judah to the south. I put this map up. So the blue area is the 10 tribes, the kingdom of Israel, and the orange area is the kingdom of Judah, 2 tribes to the south. And to the north was King Ahab, who became the king, and to the south was King Jehoshaphat. So what happened here was they became false friends. Jehoshaphat allowed himself to befriend the king of the neighboring kingdom. And if we look at 1 Kings 22 and verse 4, the king Ahab of the northern kingdom said to Jehoshaphat, the southern king of Judah, will you go with me to fight the Syrians at Ramoth Gilead? And Jehoshaphat said to the king of Israel, I am as you are, my people are as your people, my horses as your horses. Like, we're all friends here. We're all one big family. We can all work it out. We can work together. So you have, now remember, Ahab followed in the path of Jeroboam to the north, who said was one of the most evil kings in existence. in the Hebrew lineage. And so Ahab followed Jeroboam's example, and so he's talking nice Jehoshaphat, and Jehoshaphat's saying, "Hey, sure, we can all get together, and one can help the other." So, after all, and if we read in 1 Kings 22, if we fight together, we can defeat the Syrians, and then we'll have something in it for each of us. So we'll get together, we'll work together. So then we read in Ahab about what Ahab did in 1 Kings 22:29. So, and this is where Ahab says, "Yeah, when we go to battle, you can dress in your kingly robes and look like you're in charge, and I'll just dress like a lowly peasant." So in 1 Kings 22:29, the king of Israel and Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, went up to Ramoth Gilead, the place where they're going to attack. And the king of Israel said to Jehoshaphat, "I will disguise myself and go into battle. But you, put on your robes." So the king of Israel disguised himself and went into battle. So, yep, we're all friends, but I'm just going to let you have all the glory, as it were. Well, if we read through the chapter, the Syrian king says, "Don't worry about everybody else. Just go for the leadership. Kill the king." Well, they were chasing then Jehoshaphat, thinking he was in charge of both armies, and they found out he wasn't. So they said, "Well, that's silly. We're chasing the wrong person." And a haphazard random arrow from an archer happened to hit and kill Ahab. I mean, struck him so he was wounded. But Ahab had that in mind for Jehoshaphat, that he would be killed. Well, it didn't work out that way. But you don't put yourself at risk, at mortal risk. And we read on in verse 37, Ahab did die from a random arrow. But Jehoshaphat befriended somebody he shouldn't have, somebody who was called evil. Of course, we all know Ahab and his evil wife Jezebel. So be careful who your friends are. Another spiritual parasite could be electronic devices. Now, we all use some kind of electronic devices. And I'm not talking about the light switch when you come into the room. My grandfather put electricity on the farm in 1929. It was a big day. He was the first of two people in the whole region that put in electricity, and he was really ahead of his time. None of the other neighbors, just two neighbors, or two people had it, and he was one of the two. And it was pretty big because you didn't have to light a lantern or burn the candles. You had electricity. Nowadays, the technology is advanced beyond turning on the light switch. And everywhere we go, we see earbuds or earbuds. I'm talking everywhere. I'm just remarkable. And it doesn't matter if it's here in the United States or Europe or Scandinavia, wherever we've traveled, all over the country, people are in them. They got them on the job. They've got them in casual social circumstances. They're just everywhere where they are listening to something. And the cell phones. It's surprising if anybody doesn't have a cell phone anymore. We finally just got rid of our landline at the home because it was redundant, costing us money. And we have two in case we each have one, so in case one went out, we have the other one. But the cell phones, it's a very long extension cord, goes all over the world. And indeed, you can get phone calls from all over, and they can interrupt your lives. So I turn mine off, okay, so that it doesn't ring in the middle of a message. I think this was a number of years ago, up in Springfield, Missouri, where the speaker had his phone on vibrate, but it was so loud it vibrated the stand, and he covered it up pretty well. And he says, "I'm so excited to be able to talk to you." But the cell phones are everywhere in our lives, and we have to make sure that we control them instead of letting them control us. Same thing with computers. It used to be a desktop computer, and you didn't lug it around anywhere. Now, they're with us everywhere, and I can't do without them, it seems like, because they're portable. You can pick them up and go. It doesn't matter if it's an iPad or any one of a number of notebook computers. So we have to be careful not to turn our lives over to the devices, but we control them and not let them control us. There's another parasite that can horn into our lives, and that is social media addiction. There is no lack of interesting stuff that can distract us. And what does it distract us from? And of course, clickbait is interesting stuff. It distracts us from what? What are all the good things that you do? Your daily prayer, your regular fasting, your helping other people, you're loving others as yourself, meaning stepping out of yourself to help others. You're interrupting your Bible study. It can be an interruption in your life. Does this mean it's bad? No. It means that you must control your reaction or reflection on social media and not let it control you. Now, having said that, we are using social media to preach the gospel because we know this about people. And so we use the social media because we know people are looking at it, they're watching it. I know in Eastern Europe, two applications that we use are the highest used internet applications in most countries, and that is YouTube and Facebook. And so we use that combination to use that to preach the gospel in all the world. And because people are looking there and that. But we must be careful not to let it take over our lives so we get pulled away from that. Because all of these parasites can reduce our time in prayer, our ability or our capacity to interact with others in God's church. There's an eighth category, a spiritual parasite, being lukewarm in following God's commandments. Lukewarm means neither hot nor cold, that people they're busy. They're interrupted by being busy with the things that they should focus on. In Mark 12 and verses 32 to 34, it's about loving God with all your heart, understanding, and soul and strength. And then it adds to love one's neighbor as oneself. Because if you don't love God and you don't have the understanding and with all of your being and strength, and you're loving your neighbor, it doesn't do any good if you don't love yourself. That's why it's important to get rid of the parasites. Get rid of the things that drag you down so that you can effectively love God by loving yourself, loving God, and loving your neighbor. And what does it say in Mark 12:33? That's worth more than all the other things the burnt offerings and the sacrifices. And now the comment of verse 34, what Jesus said, you are not far from the kingdom of God. In other words, put your priorities in place. And the priorities are spelled out right there. And this scribe, he gets it. You know, he sees what Jesus the Christ was getting at. So if we take a look at spiritual parasites that we have to fight against, we have to be careful not to presume a moral equivalency among churches. They're not all the same, because a lot of them do practice lawlessness, as we heard in the sermonette. And so if it comes to our door, we don't get involved in false teachings. And that's happened numerous times. I live immediately adjacent to the biggest church in my town. I share my pasture fence is with theirs. One of our goats went up to the front steps during a wedding one time. We don't want to talk about that. Make sure your fences are in good shape. But they will leave little flyers on the door, just wondering when we're going to come and walk 400 or 500 feet over to their church. I've never darkened the door there, but they keep trying. And then there are others, and you may know the names of the churches that believe in going door to door, and we've had those who go to door. And I won't do like somebody that I knew at one time. He put a stop to it. And I said, well, how did you do that? He said, oh, they never want to come to my place again. I said, why? And he said, I came to the door in my underwear. And he says, they never came back. I'm not going to go that far. The third parasite that we have to fight against is normalizing sin in our lives. Don't let it become part of a daily habit of, well, it's just the way it is. whether it's television, whether it's movies, books, magazines, and so forth. The fifth social or spiritual parasite is not being careful with our friends, choosing bad friends. Bad friends you've heard about the rotten apple spoils the barrel. Well, I buy apples about a bag at a time, and I always want to pick the apple that looks like it's the ripest or the one, because I don't want it to go to the last one and find out I've waited till the last one's in the bag. I know my dad grew up in the family homestead farm, and as a kid, he said one of his jobs as a kid, or the kids were, was to go to the basement where they had the root cellar and pick out the potatoes for that day. And he said, we were specifically told, you pick out the potatoes that had started to bud that look the worst. And you always eat those first because the other ones are lasting longer. And he said he finally figured out, we ate the worst of the potatoes all year long. But he did not, he did not want to bring those into life. Now, of course, they have a better control on those kinds of things with potato distribution. But he didn't want to normalize that, always eating the bad stuff. Well, we don't want to normalize sin in our lives either by making it seem perfectly normal. Number 4, consuming things to excess, and it really doesn't matter what it is. Anything can be done to excess. Drinking too much water can kill you, and people have proven that because they've depleted by drinking so much water. They heard water's really good for you. Now, frankly, most people don't drink enough water. That's the biggest problem that most people have. But a few people then went to excess and died as a result. Well, why? Well, they drank so much water, they got rid of the salts in their body, the electrolytes, and their body is an electrical chemical machine that needs a certain balance of salt in the body or electrolytes, or the brain quits working and quits telling the organs to all work. So anything can be used to excess. So we just have to be mindful of that. Number 5, a spiritual parasite, choosing bad friends. And this can happen. It can be a good friend who went bad. All of a sudden, that's not a good relationship anymore because they made bad choices. And we don't want to make bad choices. We don't want to be like the rotten apple next to the rotten apple that got spoiled, or the bad potatoes. So we have to be careful of our friends. We don't want to become the target like Jehoshaphat was when Ahab tried to trick him. Number 6, the electronic devices can be a parasite. They can dominate our lives. Can you imagine doing without an electronic device of some kind for an hour, a day, a week, a month, and some people will just shriek in horror at all of that. And yet not that many years ago, pretty much hardly anybody had any of those things. So you're fine, but don't let them take away what we need to do to maintain our spiritual health. Social media addiction, once again, it's just like everything else. Don't do it to excess. Don't let it lead you astray. And then all of the above can lead us to number 8, which is being lukewarm and following God's commandments. Because lukewarm is not what God expects of us. How do you love God with your whole heart, your whole mind, your whole soul, your whole being, if you have a meh attitude? Just isn't going to work. God expects a higher demand on us than if we want to be in his kingdom. So lukewarm is a problem. Now, we read in the Bible that, and I liken this to clothing, that ultimately, and we read in Revelation 7 and verse 13, and we'll get there, is that people in the resurrection are described as wearing white robes. Why white? You ever had stains on your clothing and tried to get it out? Kind of hard to do with a lot of fabrics. It takes a lot of effort. And if you have a white robe, and white robes are really your behavior, your character, your level of conversion. If you have a white robe, you want to clean it up Does that mean our white robes are clean today? No. But we've got to be careful. If we stain them, we've got to clean them up as best we can. Now, it's best to avoid getting them stained in the first place. If we can do that, we have less to clean up. So I'd like to that's why I'm talking about parasites, to keep our robes, our white robes, from becoming stained. Revelation 7:13, one of the elders asked, saying to me, "Who are those arrayed in white robes, and where do they come from?" Next verse. And I said to him, "Sir, you know." And he said to me, "These are the ones who came out of the great tribulation and washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb." They accepted the sacrifice for the forgiveness of sins of Jesus Christ. And so it's critical that we be able prevent the stains from getting into the clothing. But once it's there, we need to be able to clean up our lives, and hence getting rid of the parasites. So if we go back and take a look at the parasite life cycle in sheep, where in order to get rid of the parasites, how do we do it? We have to kill the parasite, what is producing the wrong behavior, or the spiritual, in the sheep, it's the adult parasite, because they keep laying eggs and they keep having bigger problems. It's the same in our lives. If we want to create or stop a problem, we've got to find a way to stop the problem. And then what do? We've got to prevent it from coming back into our lives, just like raising the sheep. And well, what do we do with the sheep? Is we kill the adult parasites, no more eggs, and then we rotate the pastures. We don't keep doing the same old thing. We've got to do something different. So how do you replace a sin with good behavior? Or that's how you do it. You replace a sin with good behavior. So if you have a temptation for something, you have an automatic reflex on what can I do to change it out, to do something better, so that you don't have that continual problem. And everybody has, and this is not about a besetting sin, but that's not titled that way, but that's really what it is there are some things that bother people, so you need to be able to replace it with something else. Just like the shepherd replaces the pasture, he moves them to another pasture, so they can eat clean grass that isn't infected. So that's the issue in our lives. For each of those parasites, we have to be able to replace them with something else. In other words, in order to stop the behavior, we just don't stop. We replace it with something good. Now, I don't know, and I don't really want to know what your parasites are. Okay? You know what they are, and if you don't, you'll find out sooner or later anyway. But you have to replace them with the optimal, the good kind of behavior that we need. And of course, we want to, particularly now as we prepare for Passover and unleavened bread, is about putting sin out of our lives, is we've got now 10 weeks before Passover where we have to identify the parasites and then hit upon a plan to replace them. Like I say, you don't say, well, I'm drinking too much water, so I won't drink any water. No, that's not rational. What you do is you replace them with good behavior, positive behavior, and so it doesn't interfere with all the good things you do, all the spiritual nutrition that you get, so that you can continue with your daily prayer, daily Bible study, your periodic fasting, your meditation, your love of God and loving your neighbor, making sure you're taking care of yourself. So I just wanted to bring that to our attention today, that we are sheep. God calls us sheep, part of his flock, and in order to maintain the health and the integrity of the flock, and ultimately all wear the white robes that we read about in that resurrection, is to get rid of spiritual parasites.